Hi, my name's Peter Redmond and I'm a professional sand sculptor. I've been working in the industry for about 13 years now, and over the years I've had a lot of people ask me how you actually produce a sand sculpture. So I'm going to do a series of videos to explain how they're done and share my knowledge and skills. So in this video we're going to create a three-dimensional tabletop sculpture using bricky sand, and I'm going to show you the process of how we actually get the sand ready. Now what we need obviously is sand, a bucket with the bottom out of it, or a tube. We need some sort of equipment as a tamper. I just use a bit of 4x2. And we also have our tools. I'll go through those and explain what we use those for as we go through the process. We also need a little bit of water. So here we go. So preparing the sand for our sculpture is called a pound-up process, and I'll show you how that works. With the sand, it needs to have enough water in it so that it's sticky, and the way to test that is to grab a handful, give it a good squeeze, and if it holds together, that's nice and moist. So the idea is to do small layers so that the compaction process gives it a lot of strength. So first of all, we add some sand in. Being mindful to just do smaller layers. So once you're happy with that, grab your little tamper, and the idea is to just compress the sand. Don't slam it because it'll move around on the table, but just to compress it enough to squash it down. Trying to keep it sort of uniform. That's it, that's layer one. So we continue that process until we've used all of our sand. So as you can see, the pound-up process that I started is finished. The bucket has been removed and our sand is ready to go. The next process involved in creating a three-dimensional sculpture on a table like this is called the block out. And it's a good idea to have some reference material or anything that's specific to what you're trying to do as a bit of a guidance, but I'm just going to make something out of my head. So what we need: sand, a mister with water, we need some water with a brush, we need our tools, which I have. And I would also suggest, because we need to handle the sand, is to have a pair of rubber-backed gloves that are breathable as well, just so that you don't damage your skin with the sand. And here we go. Now also in this process as well, if you need parts of it to be further or more external than what you've already got, now is the chance to actually add the sand back on. Because the sand is wet, it will actually stick, so you can do that as part of the removal process. You can add on at the same time. So I'll just put my gloves on. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit of sand onto the top. Add a little bit of water. The sand dries out quite quickly when you start exposing it to the air. So a little bit of water onto it won't hurt. And we continue blocking out. So the idea is to just to get your basic shapes of what it is that you're going to finish carving. So you work your way around until you have the whole finished shape basically blocked out. So as you can see, the block out process is finished, and now it's time to actually start adding some detail and refining the sculpture to get it to the point where you're finished and happy with it. The idea is that as we go, we refine by taking away some sand, but we also add sand back on. So one way of adding sand back on is to keep some sand in your hand, add some water to it so that it's not sloppy wet, but it's quite moist, so that as you're working, if you need to add back on, you can just take it out of your hand. You don't need to keep picking up sand and working it that way. Now, a lot of the tools that I use for smaller sculptures like this are palette knives, things that you can buy from art shops. An old spoon, fantastic tool for cleaning up. A much smaller spoon, which is a really good tool for creating round shapes where you don't need to clean up the edges. And then I have a series of smaller tools like this as well, which are just palette knives which have worn down over time. Another very important part of the tool setup is also a nice soft art brush, because we add water back on, and the brush is for also cleaning up any crumbly edges and things like that, and I'll show that process as we go. So always start from the top, so work your way down. So to me this looks like it might be a dragon, so we'll start on the wings and the head. And as I said before, when we started, it's probably a good idea to have some reference material, whether you actually have a picture on your phone or whether you've had some printed out pictures. It just gives you something to look at and compare as you're working your design downwards. And if you end up working some of these smaller areas and something happens, like a piece of sand falls off or the tip breaks or something like that, don't despair, because you can actually add sand back on. That's the beauty of working with this as a medium. And another thing with working with a sand like this is it's incredibly strong, but also you need to consider the weight of the sand. So with areas such as the head and that sort of stuff, it needs to be supported. The wings here will be fine because all the weight and the pressure is going downwards, but with the chin here, you basically need to support that whole head by something underneath it. So think of that part of that as you do your design, that things need to be supported, otherwise physics takes over and it'll be a disaster. Especially for smaller detailed areas such as what I'm doing here, it's much easier to just use wet sand. So get it quite moist but not muddy, and then add it back on. And the beauty of doing that is because it is very moist, it's very easy to cut, so you end up with very nice clean cut lines. So the process we're doing at the moment is pretty much just refining it. The end detail we'll add on once we're actually happy with where we're at. And as I said in the beginning, we always work from the top down. So as we work our way down, we'll detail and finish as we go, so that we don't then have to rework an area and drop sand on parts that we've already finished. One of the really good things about sculpting with sand is you don't particularly need to make exactly what your sculpture is, because a lot of textures and things that you can create, your brain automatically tells you what that is rather than it actually being physically what it is. So it's a bit like Impressionist painting, but in sand. As I said, you can add water as you go. With using a bottle or a mister like this, you're never really going to add too much water. It's more just to keep the surface nice and pliable. So as you can see, our design has been refined. We've pretty much got all the shape that we need. So now we're at the process where we need to do the fine detail and the finishing off detail. So as I explained before, we always work from the top. So we'll work our way down, and this is where our jar of water and our brush becomes very important for cleaning off the small areas. And also I'll be using some of my much smaller tools. So there's the really thin tool here, my little spoon, and in that process I'll also be adding on small amounts of detail as well, but with the wetter sand, as I explained before. So we'll get into it. Also, another tool that we can use, which is fairly helpful, which I had in my pocket, is a straw. And part of the reason why this is a really good tool is as we're working our way down, there'll always be some crumbs and things that you can't get to, and the easiest way to get rid of it is just to give it a really light puff of air through a straw. Hence, I hang one around my neck, so I've always got one. Just don't blow too hard. All you want to do is move the sand. You don't want it blasting back in your face. There we have it. As you can see, a finished table sculpture. And as you saw, as part of the finishing and detailing process, water is very important. So make sure you have a couple of different styles of brushes and a good supply of water so that you can actually clean the sculpture as you go. And one of the last things is, when you've actually finished, clean around the base of your sculpture. I know it sounds pretty simple, but it makes a huge difference when you're actually trying to present your work. And the last thing, have fun.